Hello and welcome to a seasonal millinery video. My name is Ilona, I'm a milliner based in London, and today I'm making festive foliage. Specifically, I'm going to make some velvet holly leaves. I'll then attach them to a wreath hat and make a hat pin and also a hair comb. Just remember, these are my preferred methods. There is no right or wrong way, it's whatever works for you. So let's gather the materials and get started. I'm going to start by preparing my wire. As usual, you'll find a comprehensive list of tools and materials in the description box. I don't have any black wire at the moment, so I'm dyeing my 0.4mm white millinery wire using heat-set silk paint. I'm dabbing it on using a makeup sponge to see if this works better than using a paintbrush. The answer? No. Just use a paintbrush. Once it's dry, I'm going to iron it between sheets of baking paper with the iron set to a medium dry setting. I'm cutting it into lengths of about 11 centimeters, but you can go for longer lengths if you want to. Next, cut the velvet into bias strips the same width as the height of the leaf pattern. Then, cut these strips into mini rectangles the same width as the leaf pattern. I find it easier to mark and cut velvet on the wrong side. While I'm marking and cutting, let's discuss what kind of velvet I'm using. I always prefer to use natural fibres and avoid polyester. I'm going to be using a hot iron and hot flower tools later on in the process. If I use plastic polyester velvet, it will melt under all the heat. So I'm using a silk viscose velvet. Silk is a protein fibre and viscose is a cellulose fibre. These fibres are great for flower making. Lay out a number of these rectangles wrong side up on top of some baking paper and fuse some bonder web to them. Add the wires and the second set of velvet rectangles. Sandwich all of this under another piece of baking paper and iron with a medium dry iron. Once it's cool, peel away the baking paper and cut out holly leaf shapes. First, cut the leaf shape out, roughly following the pattern. You need to aim for the whole wire to reach the very tip of the leaf pattern. Then, scallop the edge to make it look spiky, just like real holly leaves. These scallops don't have to be the same or even. In fact, it looks more realistic if they are all higgledy-piggledy. To shape the leaves, I'm going to be using my flower tool with the double-sided knife tip. You don't have to have a flower tool, you can still do the next step with a household iron. The aim is to make the wire stand out amongst the velvet pile. To do this with the flower tool, I'm positioning my double-sided knife on top of the wire and following it up all the way to the tip of the leaf. Do this on both sides of the velvet. I forgot to film how to do this with an iron, but all you would need to do is on a hot dry setting, place the iron along one side of the wire and press. Then place it on the other side of the wire and press again. The wire won't be as defined as with the flower tool, but it will certainly still look good. And now to use the leaves on a hat. Later on in the video, I'll discuss other options for how to use these leaves. I'm going to be making a wreath hat similar to this autumn aura model. But as this hat is using seasonal holly leaves, I'm calling it festive foliage. I'm going to start by making the wire wreath structure. It's just a circle that I will bend into shape. I've done my wire join as usual and then marked quarters onto the circle. These quarters mark where I want to attach my buckram calot half hat shape. Here's one I made earlier. I already have videos on wire joins and blocking with buckram, so I'll link to those in the top right. Then I'm going to change track and prepare my lining. I know that this seems very early on in the process, but I want to make a blocked lining for this hat. If I make it now, it can dry while I'm working on covering my shape in velvet. To make the blocked lining, I've marked the area I need it to cover on Anne. Then I've used dressmaking pins to stretch the bias cut silk dupion over the curves. Next, I'm going to paint on a layer of PVA diluted with water in a 1:3 ratio. Once it's dry, I'm going to paint on a second layer. The PVA I am using is polyvinyl alcohol, which is different to standard PVA school or wood glue, which is polyvinyl acetate. It doesn't really matter which one you use, but I personally think that school glue type PVA gives a plasticky feel, whereas the polyvinyl alcohol stays slightly more flexible. Before pulling and draping my bias cut velvet, I'm going to steam it to take out all the wrinkles. I do this by dangling the wrong side of the velvet in front of the steamer. Steam is hot, so careful of your fingers if you try this. Here's the difficult bit, sewing the velvet. I could have made it easier for myself if I had a velvet edge binding, but I think the extra bulk ruins the smooth line across the head. First, I'm pinning everything in place and adding a slight drape at the sides. The first trick to sewing velvet invisibly is to never pull the thread tight. The second trick is to reinsert the needle through the velvet following the grain line of the fabric. I'm using stab stitches on the top side of the velvet and long travel stitches on the underside of the hat. If I've pulled my thread too tight, or if I haven't quite followed the grain line of the velvet on the top side, it's possible to use a needle to loosen the thread and raise the nap of the velvet back up. Next, I want to attach some veiling. I asked you all in an Instagram poll if you thought I should do black or brown veiling, and you all picked black. But it's my hat and my decision, so I've gone with brown. I'm not using the veiling in the traditional way and draping it over the top of the hat. Instead, the veiling will cover the gaps between the velvet center and the wreath wire. I need to make sure there is enough curvature to the veiling to accommodate a head curve, so I mustn't pull it too tight. To attach the veiling to the hat, first I'm pinning and sewing it to the buckram base. As I'm sewing through the top of the velvet, I'm trying to use the same invisible stitches as earlier. Then, to attach it to the wire, I'm going to weave my needle and thread around the wire, catching diamonds of the veiling where it is comfortable. Now I'll attach my lining. It should be dry now. I'm using soap to mark on the size of my hat. I'm going to cut away the excess, making sure to leave myself about 1 centimeter extra to fold under. As the blocked lining is stiffened, it's super easy to fold the edges in. I don't even have to use an iron. Next, I'm going to sew in my label. I always try to sew my label to the lining before inserting it into the hat. To sew on the lining, I'm going to use stab stitches again, but this time they will have to be stab stitches on top of the velvet as well as on the lining. To achieve this, I insert my needle at diagonals every time to allow me to travel along the edge. I've also discovered that sewing the lining seems to be easier with a shorter needle, so I'm using a Milliner's number 5 needle. Now that the lining is in, I'll add my comb. As usual, I've bound the edge in some bias fabric. Normally I'd use velvet, but I spent it all on the holly leaves, so this time my comb is bound in silk dupion. Perfect! That's the structure and interior all done. Now it's the fun bit of making the wreath. To add some extra vintage flair to this hat, I'm going to add some flower stamens to the holly leaves. Once again, I asked you all on an Instagram poll if you preferred red or white, and 71% voted for red. But this is my hat, and I've decided that I like the white ones. I'm going to cut them in half and then using a matching thread sew each half to each leaf. The stems of my stamens are light green. These particular stamens are vintage supplies, but if you wanted to use modern ones, you could colour the stems using alcohol markers. To attach the holly leaves to the wire, I'm going to work backwards and start by placing a leaf to the right of the wire. This leaf is pointing to the right. I'm poking the wire in and out of the veiling and also wrapping it tightly around the circular wire as I go along. Then the second leaf goes on, and the third, and so on. Wrapping the leaf wire around the veiling will also help secure that in case your thread didn't quite hold onto every diamond. In total, I've used 30 leaves, 15 on the front wire and 15 on the back. To hide the wire, I'm using a piece of bias binding which I've made out of silk dupion. I'm wrapping it around the wire and through all the veiling diamonds. Now, let's talk variations. I think the most obvious variation is to actually not make a hat at all, but make a Christmas wreath. All you'd have to do is to make a circular wire and then skip all the other hat making steps and just attach the holly leaves to the wire without this middle bit. You could add extra ribbons and bows and even other leaves in different shapes, colours and fabrics. But what if you don't have the time and patience to make 30 tiny leaves? Well, you can make just 5 and attach them to a hat pin. This hat pin can then be attached to various different hat shapes, giving you endless variations. You'll notice that these particular leaves are not backed in velvet, but in silk dupion. This is a very good way to use up any scraps of lining fabric that you have lying around. The other difference in this hat pin is that I've used some larger stamens in red. In fact, they're not stamens at all, they are wired vintage berries. I had a look to see if I can find a modern equivalent to buy online, and I couldn't. One way to perhaps emulate these is to mould elongated berry shapes out of modelling clay at the tip of some thin wire. But I didn't have time to experiment with this week. Maybe you could have a go. Let us all know in the comments how it went. That's enough talk about the hat pin. Let's make it. This is super easy. You'll need a number of your velvet holly leaves, a hat pin in the size of your choice, some floristry tape, some berries and a sewing kit. I'll be using 5 leaves. As usual, if in doubt, pick a number from the Fibonacci sequence. First, I've twisted the stems of 3 leaves together. This has given me one long twisted stem which I'm going to bend into a T-shape. I'm going to twist the T-shape wires as well for some extra stability. Now, twist each remaining leaf to each leg of the T-shape. And stitch on the berries. To To attach this to the hat pin, I'm going to twist the T-shaped wires around the top of the pin. Then I'll cover the wire with the florist tape. My tape is black, but you could do any colour you want. Okay, so we've made a whole hat and a hat pin. What else can we do? A hair comb perhaps? This is almost the same as making the hat pin, but you'll need a plastic comb bound in a bias strip of velvet instead of the hat pin. You could twist the leaves together in exactly the same way as for the hat pin, or you could make it a little more whimsical and add a curl to the wire tips. To do this, twist together 2 leaves and 3 leaves. Twist the 2 and 3 leaves together only at the base of the leaves, leaving the wire legs straight. Bend the leaves into a nice shape and sew on the berries or stamens just like you did for the hat pin. Twist the waxy florist tape around these sticking out wire legs and then curl the wires around a pen or pencil or anything round that you have to hand. Then stitch the whole thing to the velvet on the comb. There are still so many variations that you can do with the velvet leaf technique, but I am going to have to stop here, otherwise we'd be here for hours. I hope you can take these techniques and apply them to your own hat designs. If you do end up making creations using techniques from my video, I'd love to see them. Tag me on Instagram @Millinery. If you've enjoyed today's video, please like and subscribe. This really helps me grow and reach a larger audience. I hope you have a wonderful festive season. See you next time. Bye.